Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my full spoiler review for Suki Alone, the most recently released Avatar comic. When you are seeing this video, it's going to be on the release date for the book, July 27th. I'm recording this a little bit before that, but anyway, we're here to talk full spoilers about Suki Alone. If you want some non-spoiler thoughts on the book, a few weeks ago I did put out a non-spoiler review where I talk more vaguely about the book, while still trying to, hype up some interest in the book. So you can check that out if you want, but I will start here with just a little bit of more non-spoiler thoughts, just so you know overall how I felt about the book. So again, just in case anyone is unaware, this Suki Alone is the third of a one-shot comic trilogy that they've been doing recently in Avatar. We started off with Katara and the Pirate Silver. We then went to Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, and now we have Suki Alone. And they're basically calling this the Awesome Ladies of Avatar trilogy. Which makes sense, the three female members of Team Avatar each get a one-shot book of their own. And I think this is probably the best place to start with regards to opinions on this book, is that this book was a decent improvement over this book. Katara and the Pirate Silver is a pretty middle-of-the-road comic. It's good, it's fun. As you'd expect, the quality is high, the creative team is pretty good, but it doesn't really accomplish anything. And so, to me, it's just only a solid comic, nothing more than that. Not at all where you needed to start off with this new style of Avatar comic. Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, like I said, improvement, but only a bit of an improvement. Set more where the comics, I think, should be set in the comic timeline. It introduced a lava bender, a little bit of a nice dynamic with Toph, but ultimately, the main takeaway I have from the comic is that it ended right as it was about to get very interesting. Right as Toph is about to train this lava bender, you end. That's the most interesting thing in the book, is the potential of Toph training this character. And because it's a one-shot, they're likely not going to return to it anytime soon. So just some kind of poor decision making with that book, I think, right at the end, that just made it feel a little bit unsatisfying, even though it was better than the first book. Suki Alone is a massive step in the right direction from Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy. So it's a massive improvement over a book that was already an improvement over the previous one. So in terms of scoring, which I don't really do too often, I don't really make it super public or anything like that, but I just want talking about it. To me, Katara the Pirate Silver is like a 6 out of 10. It's average, but still good. It's over the halfway point on the scoring system. Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy is a 7. And to me, Suki Alone is probably a 8.5, probably more like 8.75. I don't quite think it's a 9. That feels a little excessive, because I do feel one-shots have potential to be better than even Suki Alone, which I like quite a lot. So I just want to make that kind of clear, both in terms of what I say as well as numbers, that I do feel Suki Alone is it's the best Avatar comic we've had in quite a while. Especially directly just talking about ATLA comics, I think it's the best comic since the end of North and South. Imbalance didn't really do too much for me, because I thought it was mainly set up for the future and didn't do all that much with the characters. And of course, they stopped doing comic continuations from The Promise all the way up to Imbalance to switch over to these one-shots. So that setup isn't going anywhere. So it sort of defeats the purpose a little bit of what that book was trying to accomplish. The first 2 books of this trilogy weren't really, I think, what we needed during this era of Avatar content. This is much more like it. And the reason for that is because it's because of Suki. We know Katara, we know Toph. Suki, though, is a character who we don't know as well as those two characters. And so simply having multiple pages of Suki backstory does wonders for her character. Having her go through, struggles, doubts, conflict, and hit a low moment, showing her flaws, is exactly what you needed to do with Suki, where she was a character who you could perhaps criticize for being, a little bit too, she's presented rather idealistically over the course of this of the series and what we saw. There's no real kind of issue. Like, she's one of the best non-bender fighters in the series. She's always pretty good-natured and fun and friendly and a good leader. Where's the struggle that we know some of the other characters have gone through? If she's going to be a member of Team Avatar, she needs to have something resembling that same depth. And I think this comic does a really good job, or at the very least makes a really strong attempt to bring Suki up more in line with the other characters, and I think it definitely works. So we'll be getting into the backstory in full here in just a minute, as well as everything that happens in the prison as well. I think that's my takeaway from this. I think it earns the title, the Suki Alone title, to follow up Zuko Alone, Korra Alone, fantastic character piece episodes. I think it gets there, because the focus is very much on Suki, who she is, what drives her, and all that sort of stuff. And that's what was needed. It's the exact kind of opposite of a book like this, where this book is just Katara being Katara. It doesn't add anything onto her character. It doesn't tell a story that links this to this, or show how this happened with Katara. It's just Katara being Katara. The fear would have been going in with this book that it's just Suki being Suki. That we just get to see the same Suki we've seen in all of her other appearances, just in this context. But no, they actually show you different, sides of the character. You show her having disagreements with her friend, one of her Kyoshi warrior sisters, and how that impacts her. More depth into how she made her decision to leave the island to help in the war. And so on. You see, like I said, that the moment of the idea of the emotions that she goes through, being on her own in the prison, what happens there, losing hope. It's really, really strong to set up eventually Sokka and Zuko arriving and the plan coming together. But let's get into the full spoilers here. So this is your last opportunity, if you don't want to be spoiled, to leave the video and maybe check out the non-spoiler video or whatever. I'm going to get pretty much straight down into talking about all of the details of this book. So we're going to be doing quite a lengthy, I suppose, analysis here. We'll also have the podcast coming out over the weekend. But anyway, let's get into this. So I'm actually going to start with the backstory, because the way the book, to me, overall flows, while the book presents it as it's sort of present day, then we have a little moment of her kind of reflecting on her past, and that's why the backstory comes in, back to the present, a little bit of backstory. I don't really feel the book takes the approach that this section of the backstory directly relates to what just happened in the present day, apart from one moment, and even that's just really on the nose why it is that way. So I think it's better that we just go through the backstory, kind of understand what it is about, the themes it's exploring, and then compare the overall backstory to the present day story. So we start with a younger Suki. If I'm to guess here, she looks to be about 8 years old. The reason I specify 8 as well is because the old Nickelodeon website told us two interesting pieces of information about Suki's past. One was that she started her Kyoshi warrior training when she was 8 years old, and the second one was that I suppose by the time we meet her in 104, the Warriors of Kyoshi, she is the eldest of the Kyoshi warriors. So whether or not these two things are canon anymore because they come from a more out there source of information, I'm not sure. But looking at the art, Suki looks to be about 8 years old in this scene, and the idea seems to be that shortly after this scene, she probably starts her Kyoshi warrior training. So we have Suki and her friends watching the current Kyoshi warriors doing some of their training. They're practicing together. Suki is so eager and intently watching them. You can tell among her whole group of friends that Suki is the one who most passionately always comes out to watch them. She's been here multiple times, knows what they're up to. We see that her best friend is named Mingja, Mingxia. No hyphens or anything like that, all one name. I think that's how you pronounce it. She's a really, really cool character because she's a bit different than Suki. All of her friends want to become Kyoshi warriors, but you see Suki immediately stands out as being the centerpiece of her group. She is a leader even at this young age. Just everyone follows her and what she is doing, and so she sort of stands out, and that's quite interesting. Whereas you see that like Mingja, as we'll see going forward, kind of has ideas of her own, but maybe gets a little bit overshadowed by Suki and how strong of a leader she actually is. But Suki notes here that, everyone, they're about to do their Kyoshi style meditation. And they're all like, what? This doesn't look like meditation. They're taking fighting stances. And we see the Kyoshi warriors get their fans out, and they basically do this kind of martial arts sequence, in unison, all together, and they make the note of like the words used are like focus together as one. And this is a big theme of this book, and that idea of the Kyoshi warriors are sisters. They refer to themselves as sisters even if they're not related to each other, highlighting how close they are. The Kyoshi warriors work as a team. That's really, really important to note. And they're so impressed by this that, Suki's group of friends who all want to become Kyoshi warriors want to be like that, where they can do that just as well as this current batch of Kyoshi warriors. So we get Mingja after this steals some steamed buns, which she shares with the rest of them, but they're caught by Oyaji, the leader of Kyoshi Island, and he wants to punish them, but specifically, he basically asks them, tell me which one of you was the one who stole these buns, and you will get punished. They refuse to basically, give up which one of them did it. It was Mingja, but they don't, and so they all take the punishment together. And they're all happy to do this because they are sisters forever, and that's what they say to each other. Just highlighting the strength of this bond, they're going to make a really good Kyoshi warrior group. Now, this first scene actually makes me consider the idea of what happened to the batch of, the previous generation of Kyoshi warriors. Because they don't look like old or anything like that they retire or something like that. So how do we cut to basically just like 8 to 6 years later, and seemingly none of these Kyoshi warriors are part of the team anymore? Or is Suki just so good that she becomes the leader, and we just have to ignore the whole idea that Suki is the oldest, apparently, of the Kyoshi warriors? This isn't really a continuity error thing that I care about all that much. This is probably just a case of, again, early ATLA probably not doing its due diligence to fully set things in place exactly. And then we encountered this idea of like, well, if we set up Kyoshi warriors for Suki to look up to, how do you explain how a very young Suki as the leader is the leader of like much older women as part of the group? And so there's no real answer there. I don't know, because obviously the origins of the Kyoshi warriors were that Kyoshi thought the women of Yokoya to fight to protect themselves in case they ever got hassled at any point, and that training eventually spread out sort of on its own to form more of a warrior group. We don't actually know at its core a ton about the exact kind of ideals of the Kyoshi warriors. So they might have rules where like, they only stay as Kyoshi warriors up to a certain age, and then they let the younger generation come in, something like that. So they always keep them kind of refreshed or something like that. There's something like that where you can explain it, but it's just an interesting sort of food for thought of like, yeah, how in just a few years, where this group that Suki looks up to should still be there, and obviously it's implied Suki is trained by them, and then they're just not around by like a year or so later. It's a little weird, but anyway. The next bit of backstory is relating to the dumpling weed, which is a major focus of the Boiling Rock plot. She finds some of this in her cell, and then when she does the meditation move herself, the training in her cell, she remembers how she basically first came across dumpling weed, which is that Oyaji one day sent her and her teammates out to find this up in the mountains, and it's revealed to be this quite hardy plant that survives in tough conditions, and it helps to explain how it's growing in the middle of Suki's cell through the cracks in the stone. So it's just basically just there. This is why Kyoshi is familiar with this plant and knows that it's healthy and will give you strength. The next backstory scene is we cut to a few years later. Suki and her friends are now Kyoshi warriors in training. She's talking to Mingja, and we find out that the island's harvest has basically almost completely failed this year. They have very low food supplies, and when winter hits, they're probably not going to do too well. The implication is that people are going to starve, and it's basically a famine on Kyoshi Island. So we bring up at this point, through Mingja, the idea of Kyoshi Island is isolated from the rest of the world, not just because it's an island, but because they basically practice isolationism. That Kyoshi laid down the law after she created it into an island, that they are properly separated from the mainland of the Earth Kingdom, and they won't trade or buy things from any of the other nations. They are themselves just an island to themselves. So we never quite got this exact sense of Kyoshi Island, that it was full-on isolationist. But now we get it here, and the idea is that Mingja's solution to the famine is, why don't we finally go against Kyoshi, what she told us to do, open the border and simply buy supplies from the other nations, so that the people don't have to suffer. Suki disagrees with this. She thinks they have to stick to Kyoshi's ideals, which they've stuck to for so long, and she has a new idea. Why don't we use the dumpling weed? We searched for it when we were younger. We can find it again. That even though a lot of the other, plants failed, this can survive in any condition. This will get us through the hard winter. And so they go out, they pick the dumpling weed, they spread it out, and they do get through this winter okay. So the plan works, but it's this idea that Suki didn't support her best friend Mingja with her plan. That Mingja truly believes that at this point it is now a mistake for Kyoshi Island to remain isolated so heavily from the rest of the world. And it's this dynamic that they start to present in this book, and there's a scene in the present day story that I think kind of links in a bit of Suki, when she comes up with her idea, just completely almost forgets what Mingja just said, and it's just like, okay, we'll do this plan together to get the dumpling weed, and Mingja's just kind of like, yeah, together, and she's just sort of sad that Suki just completely steamrolled past her own idea. Yet expects everyone to just go along with her plan. So there's a little bit of that maybe flaw of Suki, that she's this really strong leader, but she's almost so strong of a leader and a personality that it's hard to not just go along with her, even if you believe strongly in some other plan. And so Mingja just sort of is her plan gets left a little bit in the background, unfortunately. But we come back to it here after this. Even though the plan works, Mingja still believes in opening the borders, and so she's decided, I'm going to go talk to Oyaji and the leaders later. I hope you'll support me in this, because Mingja's idea, I suppose, is that okay, the famine mostly got averted. Now that it's over, will you now support me with my idea of seeing what the village leaders say about it? And Suki's sorry, I can't support you in this. But she still goes to talk to Oyaji, but the idea is that it gets dismissed straight away. But that if Suki did support her, it might have actually got through and they might have made a different decision. But it's a moment that does changed things as we see, because you think this is maybe going to lead to a rift between Suki and Mingja, but instead they cut straight to Mingja is planning to leave the island. She has a boat ready, and it's no hard feelings here necessarily. It's just Mingja truly believes she needs to leave this island. She can't agree with them just remaining to themselves while all this stuff is happening. She needs to see what the rest of the world is like and try and help things and just find out what's going on out there on her own. She won't turn her back on the world anymore, because that's the way she views remaining isolated as an island. So we get a really emotional goodbye between Suki and Mingja. You can tell Suki's very upset about this, that she only maybe realizes right now as Mingja is leaving just how heavily Mingja believed in her idea here. And you can tell, even though you cut from here to like a months, a year later or so, that Suki has been very much in thought about Mingja's ideas, because we then cut to a scene that happens post 104, the Warriors of Kyoshi. So Kyoshi Island has just recovered from, they're still clearing up the rubble and fixing the place after Zuko's attack, and Aang has just been there and so on. And Suki now believes that she and the Kyoshi warriors should leave the island to help. One of the other warriors, G or J, J-I-E, I'm not sure what way to pronounce that. She now takes up the position of being the one who's kind of very much like, no, we have to stick to being isolated as an island, following Kyoshi's orders. Suki at this point now realizes Mingja was correct. She brings up like Aang and the impact that him arriving has had, that he as the Avatar could have stayed hidden, but has chosen to sort of reveal himself and actively try and help the world. And now it's their time as well. The argument comes in from GA that, well, it's the Avatar's job to help the world. And Suki counters with, and I believe it's our job as well. And so Suki makes the same decision as Mingja did in the previous scene. She is going to leave the island, and as the leader of the Kyoshi Warriors, she makes the order of, you all have a choice. Some of you will have to stay here to protect the island. Like, she's aware that it would be silly to take everyone, but she gives the choice. If you want to come with me, you can. If you don't want to, you're going to stay and protect the island. But she, for sure, is leaving. And so she gets some support from a few of the girls, and then some of them, stay silent and stay on the island. So, it's just the idea of, the ones who believe very strongly in these ideas, and to see Suki now change her mind. All she needed was just a little bit of an extra push to fully believe with what Mingja was saying, and that was meeting Aang, seeing the Avatar return, and I suppose meeting Sokka and seeing his willingness to help, even though he isn't particularly skilled, but he's out there trying to make a change in the world as well. So, really cool scene there. The final backstory scene is, Suki has left the island, and it's pre the Serpent's Pass, so right before Suki reunites with the team. So we see it's Suki at Full Moon Bay in her sort of officer sort of uniform. She reunites with Mingja, who's traveling with a group of other people. And it's a really nice reunion. We see that there's no hard feelings between the two of them over the disagreement. You can tell Suki feels like she gets the impression that there might be, or maybe that there should be. But Mingja is perfectly fine. She's happy just to see that Suki has made a decision on her own and has left to try and help. And they're just happy to see each other again. We are introduced to a really kind of cool moment here. Mingja introduces Suki to her girlfriend, whose name is Mei Lin. It's just a really quick scene, like she introduces her along with the other people that she's traveling with. But I suppose it's fitting in the sense that because Kyoshi Island is separate than the other nations, Kyoshi and her sexuality, I suppose, was an influence on the other people on the island, and so they're more willing to be open with their sort of sexuality. So I suppose that's a nice moment that I suppose it'll be interesting to see if people have a big reaction to that. But I just like that scene. It felt quite natural the way they incorporated it in here, and it's fitting given what we've explored in the Kyoshi novels. I suppose the reference to Kyoshi in Turf Wars and so on. But the main thing here is just that they meet each other again, they hug, sisters forever, which is what was said earlier on in the book. And it's just this idea across the whole backstory that she forms such an impressive bond with her Kyoshi warrior sisters that even that slight sense of maybe betrayal that there could have been with Suki not agreeing with Mingja initially, they're still so close, they're basically family, that they're sisters even with the disagreements in mind, that they are Kyoshi warriors through and through forever. And that's going to contrast with what happens in the present day story in The Boiling Rock. But, the backstory is just fantastic. Like I said in my non-spoiler review, is there any particular massive reveal here? Not especially, but there's a lot of just subtle things of just like seeing Suki want to become a Kyoshi warrior, being the center of her group even at a young age. Seeing just her have a disagreement with her friend adds something extra to her character, and you can see maybe, okay, she's a really good leader, but is maybe not listening as much to the other people who aren't leaders, and that's maybe a little flaw that Suki has. I like the addition of that kind of depth to all of this. The world building stuff of like Kyoshi Island being isolationist, I think actually fits, given how Kyoshi actually tackles the Chin the Conqueror incident, which is that she doesn't step in to take out Chin as he's taking over the Earth Kingdom. She only steps in to defend her place. She only steps in to defend Yokoya when Chin comes for it. So her solution is just to separate her hometown from the Earth Kingdom so that it's not part of the Earth Kingdom. Chin doesn't need it anymore. And Chin dies sort of inadvertently as a result of Kyoshi's big earthbending move. So it leans into this idea of Kyoshi at this point in time, dealing with Chin, just makes a decision to separate her hometown from the rest of the world. Doesn't make any statement about like supporting the Earth Kingdom or really what Chin is doing. Just in protecting her hometown, ends up killing the guy taking over the whole Earth Kingdom. And that's why I think we need more Kyoshi content to further explain and give nuance to the situation at that point in time. We know Kyoshi's kind of, at this point, no nonsense when it comes to politics, but why does she take such a rather like extreme approach there in terms of kind of just letting Chin take over most of the Earth Kingdom and only react at the last minute? That's something I still want to know about. And I like that this relates to that in some way in terms of like, it's not just an island that's part of the Earth Kingdom. They consider themselves truly separate to everything else. No trade or buying from other nations. That's kind of interesting. As we learned from the Kyoshi novels, like Yokoya, even when it was connected, was still considered a place that like it was in a nice position, but the currents meant there was no need for anyone to stop by this place, even though it's nicely positioned, because the currents would get you straight around the area where it was. So, I guess it being an island just makes it even kind of less aware to the other nations. So, the present day story in The Boiling Rock. In terms of page count, obviously, we get about like 20-ish pages of Suki backstory, and then the remaining 50-ish pages are the present day story. If I was to say one thing about this book that's maybe slight criticism, is that I would have preferred more backstory and less Boiling Rock content, just because I feel they accomplish a lot more in the few pages of backstory. That's what I come out of this book thinking about mainly, and that there's not enough depth to me in a lot of the present day scenes to, I think, maybe justify having so many pages. And it's just a contrast between they accomplish so much in a few pages and they accomplish less in more pages. And if that was a little bit more balanced, I'd be willing to give this an even higher score than I already am giving it. Because, you needed to do something in the present day story. And I think it works, and there's a lot of nice connections. It's just, I'd say the main dynamic of the present day story isn't as strong as just seeing Kyoshi in the Suki in the backstory moments. So the present day stuff starts with the Azula Suki scene that we saw from the previews, which is mainly there to set up stuff like Azula and what she says to Sokka in 311 about, like, my favorite prisoner used to talk about you. So they reveal that that line is actually just something Azula sort of wanted to say, and Suki kind of no-sells it, but she then says that to Sokka anyway. The question here is obviously, how does Azula even know about Sokka, given the scenes she's been in with Suki, and the fact that none of them line up with Azula being in a scene with Suki while Suki is near Sokka. The only way possibly that Azula becomes aware of this is through Ty Lee, who finds out that Sokka and Suki are in a relationship in Crossroads of Destiny. But dialogue in this scene seems to either suggest that this scene takes place before Crossroads of Destiny, or potentially a good bit afterward. But then there's another line of dialogue that suggests that, who knows where it's set. So this scene has you question the continuity a little bit, which is a bit unfortunate because the book is overall so good. But this one is like, that's kind of an important piece of information. This character shouldn't know about this relationship, yet you bring it to the surface and point it out more than you almost need to. Azula's written well. It's Faith Erin Hicks' first time writing Azula. I'd like to see more of that. But the main setup is just Azula tells her how bad of a place Boiling Rock is, that you probably won't make any friends there, the food isn't great, that sort of stuff, which actually becomes a plot point within the book. When she arrives at the Boiling Rock, the main sort of premise, I suppose, for why the backstories actually happen are that Kyoshi warrior, the Kyoshi style meditation, the martial arts kind of practice in her cell, she closes her eyes when she does that and remembers her past to remind herself that she is together with her friends and that she's not alone. And that's where we get a lot of the backstory scenes from. So there is sort of a writing mechanic for why the backstory happens. It's not just that the book has backstory for the sake of having backstory. They give a reason for Suki to remember that. So the whole focus together as one, she's saying that to herself in her cell as she's doing this. And this is what gives her the strength to kind of keep on going and to try so hard in forming a community in the Boiling Rock. When she does this the first time, this is right afterwards, is when she discovers the dumpling weed in her cell and, realizes that, this is an extra source of food. And then that's when we then cut to the other scene from the preview with Biyu, Biyu. Not sure about the pronunciation. Is it meant to be Bayou or Biyu? Biyu feels a little bit more Avatar to me, so that's what I'm going to say. And so the dynamic here is that Biyu doesn't want to talk to Suki unless she can give her some more food. Suki gives her the food. They introduce themselves. And the idea here is that Biyu is an Earth Kingdom thief who is in here because she stole the heart of the son of a pretty high up person in the Fire Nation military. And they note, again, the idea of Fire Nation mothers are pretty scary. They can act pretty harshly, and that's how she got herself in here. And it seems, when you read this the first time through, you think that this feels like kind of harsh, that like, this is just highlighting the Fire Nation throwing people in prison for basically no reason. But given where they go with Biyu, who ends up being the one who betrays Suki, you almost reflect back on this scene and think like, when they talk about the idea of her like stealing his heart, given how she sort of messes with Suki and like emotionally manipulates her a little bit towards the end and really, kind of sticks the knife in about the betrayal towards the end, you almost feel that like she really did like mess around with this guy and actually like emotionally like hurt someone. And so maybe it's not as sort of petty of a theft as it initially seems. So there's an opportunity for you in your reading to maybe add a little bit more onto that. But that's just interesting. And while we're talking about BU initially, like, this is where we probably need to bring up the idea of like how in-depth or nuanced of a character is she. To me, the fear with this character is that she's very much like, I'm out for myself. She's the I am out for yourself character, and so I don't work together in a team with anyone, and I'll betray anyone I need to be comfortable. It is a very easy type of character to have be super one note, where like there's only one possible way you can go with this character, and that is the way you were going with them. And BU really, really comes close to being super generic. I think they do just enough throughout this to make it work. And a lot of it comes down to, I think, the writing in terms of the themes that they're exploring and the dynamic with Suki with regards to, Suki being the leader and potentially kind of the flaws that maybe are there a little bit for Suki about, overly assuming everyone supports her idea before she's even asked other people about the idea. We'll get to that when we get to it. But, overall, BU, I think, was fine. And coming out of it, I didn't really overly feel like this was like a super cliched character. And I don't often like to use just it's a cliche as being a general negative, because I think it's sort of weak criticism. But in this case, this style of character can often be the exact same every single time you see them. And a lot of the scenes are kind of like that. They're maybe a little bit on the nose. They don't really hide the idea that this is the character who's going to betray Suki, since going into the book she doesn't have a community when Sokka and Zuko arrive. So obviously something happens to the group she's forming, and they make it really clear by like the second, third scene with BU. Yeah, this is the character who's going to betray her. So, that's up to you as to whether you like that they were very clear about it or don't, but that is what it is. So we cut then to a few weeks later, and while on laundry duty, washing all the officers' uniforms, they have managed to construct a secret tunnel through the wall into this kind of open area where they've planted some of the seeds to have a little bit of a secret garden, because Suki's plan is to get more food so they can give food to more prisoners, to get more prisoners on their side, to eventually build up to an escape attempt with prisoners who feel stronger because of that better food. So we get a close call here as the warden comes in to inspect things, but the prisoners all work together to kind of keep watch and make sure no one gets caught at the secret garden here with the dumpling weed. And we get a really interesting scene with BU and Suki here, as like BU talks to Suki about how surprised she is that Suki as a leader has managed to get these prisoners in this high risk facility working together, willing to risk themselves, put their necks on the line for this plan that Suki has constructed, and that this is where BU basically says to Suki that she only looks out for herself, that's who she is. And we get that Suki is more about community. That Suki explains to BU that the reason that people are sort of doing this is because they can see the path to an escape attempt. They feel better because they have this food, and maybe working together an escape attempt is possible, which is the immediate next scene. A fight breaks out at the next mealtime. It gets shut down fairly quickly once the firebender guards come in, but Suki takes out a few guards here before they're all shut down. But notably, BU doesn't fight. They specifically note her sort of slinking off into the background as the action kicks off. Suki is put in solitary confinement in just a cell. She's not put in the cooler because she's not a bender, of course, so she's just put in like a really small, square, dark cell. She's brought to see the warden during this, and the warden basically just he's initially trying to get her to like reveal herself to be the mastermind behind this garden plan with the extra food. She initially acts like she doesn't know what's going on, but he reveals like he has enough information that he knows it was her, because, big moment, the the warden reveals that, yeah, you're all about community, aren't you? And trying to like build up a plan against me. Did you know that you were betrayed? That one of your community members, basically outed your whole plan to me, and now the garden is gone, the tunnel is gone, everything that you've built towards is not there anymore. You are alone in this prison. That, that plan is the furthest you're ever going to get. There's no one there to support you anymore because everyone else will just betray you. So this is the kind of big moment now. Suki has been fully betrayed by someone. And the idea seems to be that this is sort of, in a way, the first moment in her life she's been truly betrayed by someone that she trusted. That usually she's used to her Kyoshi warrior sisters, or the little bit of a dynamic she has with Team Avatar, people she can really, really trust. But now, someone she thought she could trust has gone completely against her. How does Suki handle this? And it's just added on to when Suki walks outside and sees Biyu up on one of the higher platforms, casually chatting away to one of the guards, wearing fancier inmate clothing, and it's so obvious straight away. She knows who betrayed her. It was Biyu who betrayed her to the warden. So we get Suki's in solitary for 2 weeks, and we find out that from the other inmates that Biyu has a fancy room all to herself. She gets better food and special treatment from the guards and the warden. Suki spots her again up on the platform, the higher platform, on her own. Similar situation to where she went after the warden, and she does something quite similar. She does her whole spider Suki thing, quickly, crawling up the wall, flips and stuff like that, being all stealthy, and sneaks up behind Biyu as she walks into the building. They're in there on their own. No one's aware that they're both in there together, and Suki confronts Biyu over why she betrayed her. Suki's unable to believe why this happened. Why would you go against our plan? It was working so well. We were building up to something. The fight that got me put in solitary highlighted that we were getting towards a solution to all of this. And interestingly, Biyu's kind of answer is just like, well, for one, it wasn't our plan, it was your plan. And she just goes through, like, from her point of view, she went along with Suki because the extra food made things better for her. But then the talk of an escape attempt and potentially fighting people, that made things less comfortable for her. So when she realized she could maybe get in touch with the warden and kind of reveal some information, she saw that as the path to being more comfortable. And so that's her whole idea of, like, she literally says to Suki, you are the one who need to be part of community. I don't. I'm fine with being on my own, by myself. And the thing that really, drives the dagger of betrayal home is this. You didn't think we were friends. You didn't think I was one of your Kyoshi warrior sisters, did you? And she just basically laughs at the concept. This thing that means so much to Suki, as we saw in the backstory, that they had this pretty major disagreement, Suki and Mingja, but they were able to reunite and have no hard feelings about it whatsoever. Yet here is someone who she was almost willing to go and be that close to, who just laughed at the idea of being friends, being close. And Suki, who's already furious and not in a great state of mind, because she's just been in solitary confinement for 2 weeks in the dark in a tiny room. She's already angry. Now she's furious. This moment makes her snap. She grabs Biyu, holds her out over the platform. If she dropped her, she's taking a massive fall and probably dying. She quickly, snaps out of it and just puts Biyu down on the ground, unable to hurt her. Biyu does call her a coward about this, but Suki just walks off. And we get this moment of this has really taken a toll on Suki. The reveal of this betrayal by the warden, the plan falling apart, and then Biyu just adding on top of everything by saying, you didn't think we were friends, did you? Just that this is how easy it was for someone to betray this concept that means so much to Suki of community. So she goes back to her cell to try and meditate and train to do the Kyoshi warrior style meditation, the together, focus together as one. And she has a full sequence of this multiple times. I'm not alone, focus together. She remembers the first moment, the second moment. We have a quick like montage of her remembering all of the stuff that we've already seen flashbacks for, these key moments. And then right as we get to sort of the end of this, she's like, I am not, and the next line should be alone, I'm not alone. But she can't bring herself to finish it because finally it all sort of hits her that everything that's happened, she's had strength up to now, but now she actually truly does feel like she is alone. Her sense of community, the strong leader that she's been, it hasn't worked. And now, finally, she's at her lowest moment and feels that maybe she actually is alone now. Maybe there isn't anything that she can do. And she starts to cry. It's a real, moment, low moment for Suki. But it's really well done and built up to so well that this is the Suki who, to Azula in the early stages of the book, was just kind of like, I don't need anyone's help to kind of get out. And this is the point at which she's kind of realizing, maybe I do. But she's been so strong up to now, and this is what's happened. It's, when Faith Aaron Hicks talked, I think, in an interview about, you get to see a very emotional side of Suki. It's a moment like this that just hits so hard. Seeing Suki in tears, this strong character hitting this low moment, it really works really well. But as she's crying, she looks up, and in front of her is the spirit of Avatar Kyoshi. And Kyoshi says to her, Suki, your friends love you. They have not abandoned you. You are not alone. And Suki is stunned at this, but finally comprehends what Kyoshi said to her, and is like, wait, how do you know that? How do you know that I'm not alone? How do you know that my friends have not abandoned me? And Kyoshi just smiles, and then fades away, and it's just this last moment of Suki being given hope, by Avatar Kyoshi, who obviously is very significant to Suki as the leader of the Kyoshi warriors. And then the very last 2 pages of the book is Suki, in the aftermath of the Kyoshi scene, goes from obviously crying at her lowest moment to kind of feeling a little hopeful again, but also kind of questioning a little bit what exactly that vague message from Kyoshi meant. But it's this kind of moment of okay, I guess something's going to happen, and I'll just have to kind of bide my time for now, which is sort of the emotion that we sort of see Suki in when Sokka spots her, where she's not devastated. It's just this sense of she's alone, bored, and just waiting for a chance to strike in a way. And so we cut from the now kind of hopeful that something might happen, she isn't alone, Suki, to the final page of the book, Sokka and Zuko in the war balloon on their way to the Boiling Rock, connecting this book to the Boiling Rock episodes, which come immediately after this. Really strong ending moment here. I love the Sokka Zuko moment on the final page, fully connecting everything. Even the Kyoshi spirit moment here is an interesting scene because there's 2 angles to this. The huge positives of just what a moment for the character. Suki getting a spirit visit from one of the past avatars and it being Kyoshi. It's fitting, it's fantastic, it's thematically on point for what they're going for with the idea of her feeling like she is on her own, that she maybe has been abandoned by the people who care about her at her lowest moment, and just simple words from someone she looks up to so much really helping her through. It very much feels like the same level of impact as Katara being visited by the spirit of the Painted Lady at the end of that episode, after you don't even know the whole idea. It's okay, there was a Painted Lady spirit, Katara's been acting as her, and then the real one appears before Katara. Aang's not really around, it's just a character who you don't really associate as having a spiritual moment, getting this monumental spirit moment. And it's sort of the same for Suki. You don't really associate her as being a particularly spiritual character, but here is that moment. And it's so strong. And again, it relates to the the cover of the book, the speculation that everyone had about this book based on the cover. Why is Kyoshi there? Are we going to get Kyoshi stories or backstories, or are we actually going to see the spirit of Kyoshi? And like is portrayed there, that is the spirit of Kyoshi that we actually see appear before Suki here. So, the only, I think, question in all of this is like, okay, on a technical note, how does this happen? Because whenever you talk about the spirit of a past avatar, you're always, for the most part, considering like, how does this relate to Aang? That Aang is able to talk to his past lives because he is the avatar, and a few of the times when we see that happen, the idea is almost like the spirit comes out of himself because it is the same spirit. Aang's spirit is one spirit, is Kyoshi's spirit. So the Kyoshi that Suki is seeing here ultimately has to stem back to Aang in some way because of the dialogue that she says. That, you know, your friends love you, they have not abandoned you. Either that is just words where like Kyoshi is just trying to be comforting to Suki and doesn't actually know. But the way the dialogue goes, you feel that when Kyoshi says that, she means it. Like, she actually does know they love you, they've not abandoned you, they're thinking about you. And the only way Kyoshi could know that is by being a past life of Aang, and Aang and the gang considering Suki. So that's that interesting connection. But it's the furthest away I think we've ever seen one of these spirit projections happen. Like, we have the Zhang scene where like Aang is right there. There's Tenzin in The Fog of Lost Souls, which may or may not be a similar situation, but you know, it's the most similar to this. And now this of like, Aang is in the Fire Nation somewhere at this point, so is Suki. But there realistically is quite a gap between them. How exactly does this happen? The other thing obviously is like, what connection necessarily is there between like Kyoshi and Suki? Like, you get it. She's the leader of the Kyoshi warriors and has that connection because of that. But on a spiritual level, is that there? It's an interesting one to consider in that I really like this in terms of it's a huge moment to give to Suki, but how much thought the writers necessarily put into like this and how it works, it's a little weird, but I'm willing to kind of push that aside a bit because it's such a fantastic scene for Suki to actually have. And it really makes the whole book sort of worthwhile that she is granted such a huge moment. So there overall, my kind of spoiler thoughts on the book. And yeah, like, you just come out of this and like there's so much depth here in that even the rather kind of to the point archetype character that is BU, the dynamic she has with Suki is actually kind of interesting to consider because they create a nice dynamic with Suki about like her leading people and maybe just assuming they're going to go along with her and maybe not considering everyone else's kind of feelings in things that she's leading. You saw the contrast with her relationship with Mingja compared to her relationship with BU, of someone who cares about her, cares about community as well as Suki, and then someone who doesn't, who feels the opposite, and the first betrayal she ever felt. And then on the other side, the backstory, almost like Suki feeling that she betrayed Mingja, but Mingja not feeling it as like, that's not at all the way it is. That's really good. And while none of the backstory stuff like is like sort of mind-blowing in the sense of its reveals, it's just the sort of content that was needed to push Suki up to being more on the level of the other members of Team Avatar, who all have their interesting backstory, have all had episodes of focus. We know the characters of Aang, Katara, Sokka, Zuko, Toph so well. Suki, before this book, we don't know as well because we don't get any glimpse into her background. And a lot of the times, we don't get to see her at like a lower moment. She's often, you know, the best non-bender fighter in the scene, or close to it. Her one loss is to, Azula, of course. And you have, a character who's overall presented exceptionally well, but now you get the nuance of getting to see the depth from the character. And I think that's the ultimate success of this book, that something like, say, Katara and the Pirate Silver needed to do was, if you have nothing going on in the present day story, connect it in some way to a piece of backstory we'd never heard about for Katara before. Similarly with Top Bay Fong's Metal Bending Academy, I think you had room to do something more like that. So I really appreciate the dual story take here of like, this is a one-shot, but it has a story in the present day and a backstory story. And it really made it feel like a proper big comic and one of the biggest releases we've had in quite a while. So I was really, really impressed with this book overall and how the backstory worked with the present day story. Like I said, there's definitely room for a one-shot comic to be better than this, but for what this did for the character of Suki, 2 thumbs up from me. And I think the big thing I take from this is that a character like Asami could really do with something like this, an Asami Alone type thing, to see what they did with Suki in the backstory, the depth, the struggle, moments of struggles, the flaws, add that onto Asami. That's what I want to see from Asami, to take her, who kind of suffers from maybe a little bit of the same problems that Suki does, to the same level. So, that is the spoiler review for Suki Alone. And look, I just end with just the final point of just, it is unfortunate that as I'm recording this video, the future of Avatar comics looks a bit weird in that, like, there's a chibi comic, there's a free comic book day comic, but in terms of a mainline comic, nothing's been announced, whether it be on the Korra side of things or on the Avatar side of things. We don't know what's next. Is it more one-shots? Are we going to go back to do post-imbalance stories? How is Avatar Studios truly impacting the comics? We don't really know. And it's unfortunate that, this really is the last mainline Avatar story content release of the year. And we're only just past the halfway point in the year. And there's nothing really else all the way into, say, like February, March next year. So the earliest a new comic can come out next year, realistically, is March, maybe April next year. And at this stage, it's looking more likely that it will be a Korra comic. So now we went from a big gap, nearly 2 years between Korra comics, and now we're maybe looking at a big gap between Avatar comics while they try and figure things out. Right as we're building up to Avatar Studios, which is going to take a while to release its big content. So you need this extra content, the comics, the novels, to back that stuff up well. But instead, we're going into a slow period, and it's just really frustrating to see that happen. That comics which have previously done stuff as important as the story of what happened to Zuko's mom is now locked into one-shots where we hope that a Suki Alone is maybe the best we can get out of them. I hope they can get back on track and maybe figure out the next stage of stories through Avatar Studios or something like that, because right now I look at the schedule and I see a disorganized kind of mess of releases that doesn't feature a lot of new story content. And I really hope we can get back on track sooner rather than later. But I'm going to just wrap it up there. That has been the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Suki Alone. There will be a podcast review over the weekend. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.